Йо, йо, йо. Да ми YouTube какво ще каже? Чуваме ли се? Йо, йо, йо. Чуваме се, идеално. Здрасти, има 10 секунди дилей, 10 секунди дилей, 10 секунди дилей, 10 секунди дилей. Продължаваме напред с видеята. Все пак от някъде трябва да започнем да правим каквото и да е било, може би. Спомням си, че от предното видео имаше някаква идея. Тук ще се сетих. Сметайте, забравях още от тогава. Значи сега, дайте да видим. Може би от тук ще излезе нещо друго, което ще ни хареса. Евентуално може да направим сценка. Ще се измисля определено. Да, окей. Добре. Какво ще бъде? И така, нека да започнем.
Introduction to 3D modeling for 100% absolute beginners, we are going to build out this fantasy sword model. We will start with a practice run getting you up to speed with the most common 3D modeling tools. Then we will learn the essentials of 3D primitive modeling techniques and build out the sword step by step. Then in part 3, we'll learn about geometry nodes and build the fire effects on the blade and build out the environment. And we'll end with a bonus character integration. If this tutorial looks intimidating for you, I encourage you to keep going. Like many have said in the past, the steps are broken down and are simple and practical for an absolute beginner to follow. All you need is to complete part 1 of the series, and the link is in the description. So stick it out with me to learn the most common 3D modeling tools coming up. In part 1 of the series, we primarily worked by manually clicking on the viewport tools. Although this is a fine way to work when we first start, over time clicking on each one of these can really slow us down as we need to rotate between them a lot. And our goal for this chapter is to begin to integrate some more hotkeys into the workflow. Step number 1 is to download the hotkey cheat sheet. Click the link in the description labeled downloads, and then you will see the download content that we'll be using. For starters, download the hotkey cheat sheet and keep that handy while you work.
Ама, опитах се да изляза от това с кликането по някакви файлове. Добре. Как кликаме тук и клик Join us newsletter, бла. Sorry. И сега ви казвам. Temporary имейл. Това е решението на абсолютно всички тия проблеми. Temporary имейл. Такива спамърски истории, съжалявам. Знам, разбирам. Fuck no. Човек. Почтата ме е пълна догоре едната с такива глупости. Окей. Ние сме тези. Направо директно напусна. Hotkeys cheat sheet. И чакаме. Това файл вече го няма. Ето. Окей. Страница. What the fuck, те сложена на страница? Която е една от четвъртата на картинка. Окей. Ще го имаме като нещо отворено.
At the top of our hotkey cheat sheet, we'll have our viewport navigation controls. This is what we learned in part 1 during our Minecraft project. Now we're going to focus on integrating the viewport tools, specifically the GRNS hotkeys. And step number 2, we'll start with the G, which is our move and grab tool. Once we hit G on the keyboard, you will notice that the cube starts to move around. All we have to do is simply move around the mouse and then click anywhere to drop it back into our scene. Now, if I hit G again, you will notice that it just starts floating around a bit and we want to snap it to a specific axis. And we can do so with the X, Y, and Z snapping hotkeys. After you hit G to enter move, we can then hit X, Y, or Z to snap the movement to a specific direction. X is going to be the red axis, Y is going to be the green axis, and then Z is going to be the blue axis. Step number 3 is R for rotation. Once we hit R, you'll see that we start to move around our mouse and we can control the rotation. Then all we have to do is click the mouse again to drop it back into our scene. In step number 4, we have S for scale. Hit S and then we can drag our mouse around, move in and out to scale up and down our cube, and then click to drop it back into our scene. Then if we want to snap our scale or rotation tools, we can then use the same X, Y, and Z snapping hotkeys while we're in the middle of our scale or rotate tool. This snapping method can be a little bit tedious, and this is where I see a lot of people that are new to Blender get really stuck, and this was really tricky for me as well. Now, if you have used Blender a lot in the past, this is totally a fine way to work, and we're going to take a look at an alternative and much simpler way in the next chapter.
Беше много установя до няколко купче. Разсевам се.
The final hotkey is our selection tool, which is W. Now there's a big Blender gotcha here with the selection tool. As you hit W a few times, you will notice that your selection tool begins to toggle through different selection types. This is a very problematic area of Blender. To change this, click and hold the select icon to go down to box select. Throughout the entire course, we're going to use box drag selection. So go ahead and set that now if you haven't done so already. And just remember that if you hit W too many times, this is going to automatically change and not be box drag selection anymore. And in the next chapter, I'll share with you a way of locking the selection with the add-on that we're going to talk about. That's going to make all of this a lot simpler. So how do we simplify the GRNS hotkeys? The way I like to work and the way most people end up following along with me is by using the Lazy Viewport add-on. This is an add-on that we made that is free to use. I'll show you how to install this after this example. You'll see what this does is after I enable the Lazy Viewport add-on, my G, R, and S hotkeys now are working with the viewport tools, the same viewport tools that we used during the Minecraft project. For me and the thousands of people I've heard from about this add-on, this makes it drastically easier to use the GRS hotkeys as they are much more visual, they're way less technical, and then we don't really have to predict which axis we want to be on with the XYZ hotkeys. So how do you start working with the Lazy Viewport add-on? In step number 6, click the downloads again in the description, and then right next to where we downloaded the Blender hotkey cheat sheet, we have our Lazy Viewport button.
Как приятно. Так, цак.
Click that and it's going to route you over to GitHub, which is where the add-on is located. And then from there, we have a green button at the top right. Click that and then select download zip. Once you have that downloaded, right click and extract the file. Then go back into Blender. Go to the edit menu and go. Once you have that downloaded, right click and extract the file. Then go back into Blender, go to the edit menu and go all the way down to preferences. In our preferences, we want to select add-ons on the left side of the panel. And then we're going to click install. Then we just navigate to our lazy viewport file that we just extracted. We do not want the zip file, we want the .py file. So navigate into that directory file and you'll see the Python file, which is in our add-on, and then select it and then click install. From here, we need to enable it. Simply search the lazy viewport using the search menu, then click enable. If you're not seeing anything after you use the search results, you may have attempted to install the zip file, so be sure to install the extracted .py file. Now, if you're already used to the built-in XYZ hotkeys, you're not obligated to use the lazy viewport at all. Both methods work just fine. There's no right or wrong way to move things around in Blender. However, if you are new to Blender, and specifically if you are coming from the Minecraft project, I highly advise you to download the lazy viewport and take on full advantage of it. The default XYZ snapping hotkeys tend to be very, very problematic for beginners. And the lazy viewport, on the other hand, makes it a much smoother process. Now, the final step is our practice round. Just like if I were to teach you how to do a push-up, it doesn't magically make you strong. You have to practice at it to get strong. Right-click on your cube, duplicate objects, hit escape to drop it just like we did in Minecraft. Hit G to move it over, then hit R to rotate it, and then hit S to scale it. And then a very special note here for this.
Move.
scale tool, hit it, drop it just like we did in Minecraft. Hit G to move it over, then hit R to rotate it, and then hit S to scale it. And then a very special note here for the scale tool, we're only going to use the white handle. The white handle is what we're primarily going to be using throughout the course. I'll repeat that again. Right click duplicate object, hit escape to drop it, G to move it over, R to rotate it around, and then S to scale it on the white handle. Now you want to do this drill 5 to 10 times.
Sounds a little bit reasonable, maybe. На арт-инсталация. Как се казва? Тук сега може би още едно купче тук. Че за Wolf. Малко ще го преместя. Да, така изглежда добре. Скел. Малко ще го намалим от всякъде. Може би от тук така ще го увеличим. Трябва основно това нещо, така че може да го дупликираме в него. Ще трябва по-голямо определено за него. Цък. Не, size ще ни трябва много по-малък. Ще го придвижим малко насам. Няма се снапнат. Добре. Така. И... Shit. No! No. Delete. Duplicate. Scale. Не. По-скоро да го преместим с G. Сега може да го скелнем. Да го преместим подбаващо. Пак, но... Окей, това се знае. Това все още се представя себе си за голям квадрат. Така изглежда готин. Може би, ако... Ето това го държи тук перфектно. Супер сме. И сега какво? Може би тук да му направим още едно. Този големия куб. Ще го дупликираме. Ще го ескейпнем. Ще го местим. Ще го ротейтнем. Преместим. Може би е така. Да вдигнем купата на България за най-добър 3D дизайн модел. Scale. Един голям блок е така. Що пък не? Виж, то се намести. Няма грешка. То може би някаква реклама. Окей, мисля, че се забавлявахме достатъчно.
Yes, that sounds tedious, but is much less painful than struggling the rest of the way throughout the course. The key to learning 3D software early on is repetition. Knowing this information doesn't help you if you cannot effectively apply it efficiently. And being able to move with these hotkeys effectively and efficiently along with other tools is crucial for your success moving forward. So get your 5 to 10 practice tries in, and we'll continue in the next chapter. Our goal for this chapter is to get to know edit mode by clicking on the object mode drop-down menu. So what is the difference between object mode and then edit mode? Object mode is going to be for doing basic things like layout and animation and lighting. Edit mode is where we enter the world of 3D polygon modeling. For example, in this project for the sword, we'll turn a cube into a blade, and then we're going to turn a cylinder into the guard, and then we're going to use another cylinder to create the handle, and then another cylinder to then create the pommel. For step number 1, we want to practice jumping in and out of edit mode and object mode using the tab hotkey. I'll start in object mode. Then first we need to define our selection. I'll select one of my cubes. Then I'm going to hit the tab hotkey on my keyboard, which
ми хареса прекалено много. Duplicate loop. Edit mode. Okay.
will automatically switch us from object mode into edit mode and then back again into object mode. I'll hit tab to jump back out into object mode. Then I'll select another object. I'll hit tab again to then go into edit mode. And then you want to repeat this process over and over at least 5 times. Tab into edit mode, tab out to object mode, and then select another one, tab into edit mode, then tab back out to object mode. Now, a really big Blender trap to fall into is attempting to select other objects while you're in edit mode. Be sure to bring your eyes back to the video for this one. Once you're in edit mode for one object. You can only select sections of that object now, and you cannot select any other objects until you jump back out to object mode. Very tricky. And continue practicing. Now, as you jump in and out of object mode and edit mode, you'll notice that there starts to be a lot of stuff that changes inside of Blender. So let's break it down exactly what's changing here and why. For starters, on the left, we have our modeling toolbar, and we're going to be learning a lot about these as we go. Then at the top here, we'll also have our modeling menu, which we'll be diving into more in a bit as well. For now, all we need to know is that our viewport tools and menus are now changing whenever we toggle back and forth between object mode and edit mode. So we can only do things in one mode or the other. In edit mode, the 3 most important items to get to know first is our edit mode selections. At the top left, right next to where it says edit mode, we have 3 different selection modes for vertices, edges, and faces. So what are our vertex, edges, and faces? With any 3D object that we're going to be working with, generally speaking, it's going to be made up of polygons. And a polygon is made up of 4 different verts, 4 different edges, and then 1 polygon face. This is our vertex, edge, and face selection mode. And for step number 2, we're going to use the edit mode selection tools to begin modifying our mesh. After I'm in edit mode on one of my cubes, I'll jump into vert selection mode by hitting number 1 on my keyboard. We can also select these with our mouse, but get some practice in using the hotkeys. And now you'll notice that once we select our move tool, we can select each individual vertex and move it individually. So play around with vertex a bit. And then for step number 3, we're gonna have our edges. So I'll hit the number 2 key on my keyboard to jump into edge mode. We'll select any edges, and then we can start to move those as well. Very, very, very easy. And then for step number 4, we'll jump into face selection mode by hitting number 3 on the keyboard. And then from here, we can select each individual polygon face and then move those as well. Very, very easy. So go ahead and play around. And we're just going to practice sword chapters next chapter. With this selection for a bit, and we're going to get to move those as well. Very, very easy. So go ahead and play.
Nice. Какво? Значи едно с едното маркираме ъгълчето. И можем да ги местим. Nice. Малко навътре. Ето факт това не се знае какво е. Може би с ръбовете ще видим. Това се направи някаква много странна форма. Защо тук изглежда толкова странно? Много гадно го щупих това. Минавам през всичко. Така ми хареса повече. Да, разбрахме какво може да прави. Да минем така. Да го дупликираме. Ето тук ще го сложим така. Отидем на View. Искаме Ramp Selected. И от тук можем да се влезе в втория, в третия. Искаме този целият фейс да го удължим. Мяу. Мяу. Окей. Това лице можем така. И... Оп, оп. Аха. Можем така. Ще минем две. Ще изберем тази страна. Цък. И тази страна. Цък. Можем да изберем цялото това нещо, да го завъртим на 360. Окей. Окей. Минаваме в другия режим. Минаваме едно. Цък. 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 Това трябва да е удобното нещо. Може би. Тук трябва да има наклон лек. Това е. Няма страна. Обаче го правим така, че все едно, че има някакво много чупено е. Ако отидем в шейдинг, има в шейдинг, сочим това не, всъщност трябва горното. Пю. Окей. Много сложен текстура. Ето е. И сенки. Виж. Ти. Да. Ambient. Добре, ambient. Distance. Но. Фактор. Малко. Но. Не мога да забележа. Пък се мога да напиша така. Добре, нещо. И колко блестящо искаме. Радиус. Голям. Естествено до края. Трешхолда. Това не го знам за кой. Кой ще чупи коляната? Всичко също чупи ли? Тук сега се вижда. Но това тук всъщност не е ръб. Програмата го прави автоматично. Но би трябвало да е. Yep. Yep. Ето. Това са ние ръбовете от формата и то тук и тук го чупи. Бах ти гадното. Layout. е много бъркащо. Okay.
Out with this selection for a bit, and we're going to get to know some modeling operations in the next chapter. Our goal for these next few chapters is to get to know the most common edit mode tools. And we're going to start building the sword after these couple chapters, so this is your chance to get dirty and make mistakes. We're just going to practice a couple tools. And with these edit mode tools, the number one problem I see from beginners, and this was a huge problem I had as well, was not understanding the difference between destructive and non-destructive workflows in 3D. Doing basic move, rotate, and scale operations, this is a non-destructive workflow, meaning no matter how much we distort the original mesh, we can always get back to the original mesh by resetting it to its default values. This is a non-destructive workflow. We can always go back in time. And with destructive workflows, they are the complete opposite. Very similar to cutting a piece of paper with some scissors. Once we cut it, that's it. It's done. We can't magically uncut the piece of paper. This is a destructive workflow. And most of the tools that we use in edit mode are going to be a destructive workflow, which as a beginner can be very problematic, as every action that we do is completely dependent on the action that we do before it, making it a very linear process. So a simple workflow that we can do to help with this is number 1, navigate into position. Number 2, select the mesh. Number 3, select the edit mode tool. Number 4, perform the action. Number 5, undo if necessary. And number 6, repeat all of these steps. And the key process here is that number 5, undo if we need to. Because once we repeat these steps over and over and over, we can very quickly get to a point of no return. And then the undo button, of course, will not save us then. So how do we apply this? Before we get going, let's both reset our scenes so we're both working on the same page. Go to the File menu, go to the New, and then select the General preset to jump into a new scene. Go ahead and hit Don't Save, and now we'll get going. So first, let's try the Extrude tool. So step number 1, I'm going to navigate into position. I'm going to select my default cube, then I'm going to go up to the View menu, hit Frame Selected, or you can hit the number pad period key to jump into place. And we want to be using frame selected a lot as we work. Then I'll orbit around so we can clearly see the top of our mesh. Now, the reason why this step is so important is that because if you're looking at this object from a distance, it's very similar to cutting a piece of paper with a tiny pair of scissors, which is very difficult and very unnecessary. And so step number 2, we're going to select the mesh. I'll jump into edit mode by hitting tab. I'm going to jump into face selection mode by hitting 3. Then I'm going to select the top polygon of our default cube. Great, and now that was step number 2, selecting our mesh. And now for step number 3, we need to select our edit mode tool, in this case, our extrude tool, which is the very first modeling operation on the left modeling edit mode toolbar. And then as soon as we select that, we see that we get a new handle. This new handle is how we move on to step number 4, which is perform the action. Whenever we enable this tool, nothing has happened yet. And so to be able to extrude this, we're just going to click and drag upwards on this handle. And now we can see editing this mesh is like working with a normal sized pair of scissors, because these modeling operations happen in our screen space. The bigger our editing area is, the more control we have. And we're going to practice doing this a couple different times. Extrude once, extrude twice. Now, as you work, what you want to do is continue to navigate into place. And we're primarily going to use Shift and middle mouse button to do these micro navigation movements. Number 2, our selection is already made. Number 3, our edit mode tool is already selected as well, so that we can jump straight to perform the action. So I'll click and drag and then navigate into place, click and drag, navigate into place. Continue to do this a few more times to get that practice in. Then we'll do another selection by selecting the side face to extrude that out sideways. I'll select the polygon face, get into position, and then continue to extrude that out. Now, as I work, you'll notice that I'm constantly navigating into position before and after every single action. Every single action that I do, I get closer and closer to my working area so that I'm not working with those tiny scissors and I got more control. Great, and we'll continue with our practice round in the next chapter. Great, now we'll do this again, and this time we're going to use our inset tool. For step number 1, we'll just navigate into place. We'll get comfortable in our viewport. Now's a good time to go ahead and go up to your view menu and then select frame selected again, or hit the period key on your numpad. Orbit around to get into perspective. And then step number 2, we need to set the selection, which is already done for us at this point. And then step number 3, we need to select the edit mode tool. So I'm going to select my inset tool, which is directly under my extrude tool. Then as soon as we do, we see that we get a new circular shaped handle. Now, before I perform this action, I want you to pay very close attention and bring your eyes back to the video. Now on this handle, I'm going to click and drag. Now, while I'm still dragging this, while I'm still in drag mode, I have all the control I want to be able to move this wherever I want. But then as soon as I let it go, the operation is then performed. Just like cutting a piece of paper, we want to be very patient and slow with these operations so that we get them just right. And then I'll let go of my mouse to complete that action. And then now we're going to go ahead and practice step number 5, which is undoing this. So I'm going to go up to my edit menu, hit the undo button, and there we go. Now we can redo this. But if we were to continue on with this, we may not be able to get back that far. Now we can perform that action again. I'll click and drag on my handle, being very patient as I get it into place, releasing to confirm that action. Great, and now I'm going to switch back to my extrude tool and extrude this inwards. I'll select the extrude tool, which is directly above the inset tool once again, and then I'm going to click and drag on that handle to extrude that in. And as you can see here, with just these 2 tools alone, we can start to create some very complex shapes. And then the next tool we're going to get to know is the merge tool. So first I'll select my select tool, and that will deactivate the extrude tool that we were currently on. So step number 1, I'm going to get into position. I'm going to rotate around and get on the side of our extrusions. Then step number 2, we need to do our selection. I'm going to jump into vert selection mode by hitting number 1 on my keyboard. And then I'm going to select one of the vertices. And then I'm going to use shift on my keyboard to select the second vertice directly next to it.
No, nesta strana. To. Skoro na jedno. Zobaczymy do tego. Możemy zaselektować toczki. Tazy. To i ten jest button. Super.
Now in this case, step number 3, which is select the edit mode tool, and step number 4, which is perform the action, are the same button. So I'm going to go up to my mesh menu, I'm going to go down to merge, and then I'm going to choose merge at center. And then after we hit that button, we should then see that our
Mesh, merge at center.
vertices are now one vertice. This is our merge tool. We don't have much control.
Staram się wszystko myślę na stan. Dobra. Okej, znaczy tutaj ma te dwie three team ship face. Okej, jedno weźmy T i T. Merge at center. That's what Russian stand.
Control over it just kind of does what it does. Now I'll try the merge tool one more time, but instead of using the menu, we're going to use a hotkey. I'll select the bottom vert here, and then I'm going to use shift on my keyboard to select the second vertice directly next to it. And then we're going to use the hotkey M to jump into our merge menu. And then there we see our menu, merge at center, just like we did before. And the next tool is our loop cut tool. What this does is it adds a new edge that wraps around the existing edges on your surface. Use Control R to activate your loop cut. Hover your mouse over to find an edge center. This step is a bit tricky. As you have your mouse around, you'll notice that this can be a bit hard to find. The preview edge starts to jump around a bit. So bring your mouse back to the very center of an edge to stabilize it. Once you find it, click to enter the loop cut slide, then immediately hit escape to drop it, which will create a new loop cut directly in the middle of the two edges. There are other ways to use this loop cut tool as well, but for this complete beginner's course, we're going to keep it very simple, and that's the only way we're going to use it throughout the entire course. And we'll continue in the next chapter. Our goal right now is to transform a cube into the very tip of the blade using edit mode. And the very first step to do that is to block in a low-res version of the mesh. Then we're going to add details in as we go. For step number 1, we're going to reset the scene. Be sure to do this now. This new file is going to be the one that we're going to carry through the remainder of the course, and we
Cioè, se isso não se mal. Dobre, znaczy. Proszę cię tu lewo i esse i dwa. Tu acha? Golão, this night. Сега, казахме, че искаме да си играем, нали? Добре. Купче. Това го прави цяло 5. Окей. So. И как позволите да добавим на куп? Щита. Кюб. G. Дел. Сега. Size. В. Окей. Отиваме на този мод. Ще тракаме faces. Избираме face. Казахме, че ще искаме shortcut shift spacebar. Искаме това. Бам. Wait the fuck. Какво се случи сега? Добре. LOL! What the fuck, what did I create? Окей. Окей, това ми харесва. Ти Shift A Cube. Nope. G. Това тук. Тя при те. Size. Окей. Сега Edit Mode. Искаме всичките му фейсове. Да се случи много също нещо. На всичките фейсове. Може би да се не може. По-нататък. Така. Но все пак ще се поиграем така малко. Направим квадратче. Така. Супер. И кой каже, че те могат по-отделно така да се вдигнат. Така. Ти стана като трон. Титай. Ха-ха! Капан. Тук така ще го направим малко да е красиво. Може това да направим тъй. И това става също. Колко яко става. Тъй сега. Ако искаме да значи, може да пробвам така всички тези неща, че надолу може падне, ако няма падне. Става яко. Обаче половината точка не са селектирани дори. Окей. Това. Добре, можем да направим така. Значи не ми трябват всичките тези лица. О, shit! Между другото, Face. Size. Rotate, не. Move. Искам зелената строка, не зеления квадрат. Моля. О, shit. Nice. Нека познае, ако направят. Ще излезе. Пак чупим много схемата. Въй, това е 3D. Колко е щупено, човек. После колко време може би си играеш да правиш някакви глупости е такова. Дето си ги създал. Гледай ръбове настрани. Къде е това настрани? Как да стигне до това решение, че ще бъде там? Сайз. Може би ще го направим по-малко. Ще го завъртим на тъй. Това става почна. Човек от стол почна да става сцена. Тук ще сложим говорителя някъде. Не съм сигурен дали геометрията ме като хората на това нещо. Би трябвало да е до някаква степен. Окей, поиграхме с тези. Видяхме, че можем да забъркаме всяки неща. Да, това че е как трите страни ще ги събереш. И ще се получи това. Може някой. Не. View Frame Selected. Чек как и то. Куба. Моля. Куба е тук. Не знаю, доста интересно. Okay.
I want to start fresh here so that we're both going to be on the same page. And then step number 2, I'm going to set the initial scale values for the tip of the blade. I'm going to start with the default cube. I'll select that. I'll jump into my object properties. Then our scale values to a value of 0.23, 1, and then 0.06. And that is going to be our scale X, Y, and Z. Then after you apply those values, what we should start to see now is we have a rectangular shape. And how did I get these values? These are all from when I prepped the lecture. Normally I would eye this up in the viewport, but let's both start here so we're setting ourselves up for our success. Then step number 3, we need to add more resolution to the mesh. I'll hit tab to jump into editor mode. Then you'll notice that everything is selected by default the first time we jump into edit mode. That's what we want. If yours isn't selected, go up to the select menu and the very top, select all. Then continuing in edit mode, I'm going to right click on our top option and hit the subdivide button. Click that and what you should then see is that we now have more edges to work with. Hit the subdivide ball. Then continuing in edit mode, I'm going to right click on our top option and hit the subdivide button. Click that and what you should then see is that we now have more edges to work with, which makes this as a destructive workflow so that we can modify it in edit mode. Then step number 4, we're going to use our merge tool. And we're going to do so with the help of the same modeling workflow we did in our practice rounds. So step number 1, we're going to navigate into place. I'll go up to the view menu. I'll hit frame selected while I have everything selected on my mesh. So super important that we do this now. These next few chapters, we're going to be working very closely to the mesh and we want greater control. And again, we don't want to be working with that tiny pair of scissors. Then afterwards, super close, step number 3, we need to select our mesh. For our working area, I'm going to hit 1 on my keyboard to jump into vert selection mode. And then I'm going to box drag select the very tip of the cube. And note here I have 9 verts selected. I'm going to rotate around to confirm that I got them all. And a very special note here, the vertices that we've selected should be on the negative y-axis, which basically means the green handle that does not have the y letter on the 3D axis should be pointing towards us, not away from us. And the reason why is that's just going to help us stay on the same page throughout the course. And then step number 3 and step number 4, select a tool and perform the action. With our merge tool is going to be the same action again. I'll hit M hotkey to get our merge menu, and then I'm going to
To откъде беше? Mesh, Merge, at Center.
choose merge at center. And then what you do, you should start to see that we now have a tip starting to happen. We're starting to get it somewhere. Now we're going to repeat this for the side. I'm going to select 3 different verts this time on the side, making sure I've deselected the original selection, hit M and then merge at center. Then I'll select the 3 more in the back. Hit M, merge at center. Great, and now we have one side done and starting to feel like a blade. I'm going to rotate around to the other side, select 3 verts, M for merge at center, then repeat once more for the back. And a super very special note here, we're not going to merge these verts all the way in the back here, in the back center. We're going to use that for the thickness. Great, and that was our merge tool blocking in the low poly version of the blade. And this is how we usually start modeling, starting low resolution and then slowly layering details onto the mesh as we work towards the final result. And we'll continue in the next chapter. Our goal now is to set up Blender's backup system. As you move forward, you're going to be making a lot of mistakes, and you're going to need to redo sections. This is how we all start as beginners. So step number 1, let's set up our Blender project directory. On your computer, make a directory called CG Fast Track. We'll throw everything inside of there. Then inside of there, save your sword into a sword.blend file. Inside of Blender, inside of that directory. Then you'll want to create a downloads folder as well. And throw all the downloadable content from this course inside of that directory. This will help you stay a bit more organized. Blender often works with relative paths, meaning later on when we make connection to textures, this becomes much more forgiving, and then we can move our CG Fast Track directory around our hard drive with more flexibility. So how do we get backups going? Step number 2, you want to make sure that your auto save is on. I'll go up to my edit menu, I'll go down to preferences, then down to save and load. And we want to make sure that auto save checkbox is turned on. And what this will do for us is every 2 minutes, it'll automatically save. Autosave checkbox is turned on. And what this will do for us is every 2 minutes, it'll automatically save our file. This is most useful if Blender accidentally crashes on us. Then we recover our autosaves under the file menu, then recover, then we have recover autosave. Very, very, very useful. Last session is also useful. This opens the last state of your Blender file whenever you quit out Blender last time. And then step number 3, we need our save versions. All we need to do is set the save versions here to a value of 20. And what this is going to do is automatically make incremental backups of our Blender file. Each and every time we hit our manual save file, helps us when we make a mistake and say our bevel tool, for example, goes into chaos mode, and you can always get to a backup where that issue wasn't present. And this really works well because with the CG Fast Track format, where we break everything down into bite-sized chapters, so worst case scenario, you only have a few minutes to redo rather than a 3-hour course. Now, opening these backup files are a bit tricky. So step number 4, let's practice opening these up. Go ahead and save your file with save as if you need to, and then hit save a few times. And each time we do that, we'll get a new backup snapshot going. And we can open these up if we go into our file open menu. But the problem is here, whenever we look at this, we don't actually see them by default. So what's going on here? We need to adjust our file filters, and then we need to turn on .blend files. Now we should start to see that each and every time we save, we can now open these back up in our file open button very, very easily. All right, and once you have your backup system going, we'll continue in the next chapter. Our goal right now is to take the block in of our blade and add in a center groove using our bevel tool. And for step number 1, what I'm going to do is just rotate the viewport around so I can easily see the base of my blade. That's just going to allow us to make the selection a little bit easier. And then step number 2, we just need to make the selection. So I'm going to hit 2 to go into edge mode on my keyboard. And then I'm going to select the center edge right here. Now what we want to do is select all the way around the back. So I'm going to shift select this back 2 edges right here. And then I'm going to shift select that bottom one right there. So now we have a total of 4 edges selected. And just a note here, I do not have the tip selected. So we do not want to have the tip selected right here. Once we have those 4 edges selected, I'm going to jump into my bevel tool. But before we try this on the blade, bring your eyes back to the video. There's a couple Blender traps to check out first, so let's go over the do's and don'ts of the bevel tool. Number 1, being overly aggressive. A little bit goes a very long way. Number 2, being zoomed out. This also makes the tool work more aggressively. Number 3, dragging on the handle in the wrong direction. Makes it unstable. And then number 4, accidentally clicking on the bevel tool twice. You only want to touch this once. And what we do want to do is, number 1, be very gentle. Number 2, drag in the direction of the handle. Regardless if the direction of the handle looks like it's going the wrong way, drag in the direction it's going anyway. Okay, now it's your turn. And after we have our edges selected and we've selected the bevel tool, and we want to be very gentle with this, and then I'm just going to click and drag on that. And I'm roughly going to go about 30% of the way. Yours does not have to be perfect. It doesn't have to match mine exactly, but somewhere in that ballpark should be good. And then step number 4, we need to add a loop cut directly down the center of the mesh. I'll hit Ctrl+R to enter the loop cut mode. I'm going to hover my mouse over to find the center of the edge. And then once I find it, I'm going to click once. But now instead of dragging and dropping it, what I'm going to do is hit the escape key on my keyboard. And what this is going to do is drop it perfectly into place at the center of the mesh. So escape mid loop cut drops it at the center. Very good. And then for step number 5, I'll scale this inward. I'll hit S to jump into my scale tool. And then super special note here, we're only going to be scaling on the blue handle downward. And then after we have that scaled inwards, we'll see that we now have our groove blocked in. At this point, it's a good idea just to rotate around, look at the top, look at the bottom, make sure that everything's looking good. And then after that, we'll go ahead and start adding some more details in the next chapter. Looking good. Good idea. Scaled inwards. We'll see that we point on the blue handle downward. And then after we have that scaled inwards, we'll see that we now have our groove blocked in. At this point, it's a good idea just to rotate around, look at the top, look at the bottom, make sure that everything's looking good. And then after that, we'll go ahead and start adding some more details in the next chapter. At this point in our model, if something feels off, something is missing. So our goal right now is to add in a slight roundness to the edge to add a bit of realism into our blade. We're going to do this with the help of our subdivision surface modifier, our sub-D modeling workflow. And step number 1 is to add in our subdivision surface modifier. We'll go to our modifier panel, the wrench icon. We'll go up to add modifier. And then in the second column, all the way to the bottom, the 5th one from the bottom, we're going to choose subdivision surface. And then once you click that, what you'll see that is now we get our cage mesh. We have our cage mesh and we have our final subdivided mesh. So now we are officially in sub-D modeling mode. And then step number 2, we'll set our sub-D settings. The first one is levels and viewport. And we're going to want to change that to V2. And what that's going to do is just guarantee us that our viewport, which is what we're looking at right now, is going to be the same as our render. And we'll talk more about rendering in a bit. And that's basically just so we don't get any unpredictable results later on. And the second setting we want to get to know is our modifier display settings over here. And by default, we can see the modifier in edit mode, object mode, and rendered mode. We are going to turn off visibility in edit mode, the second icon to the left. Disable that and it'll turn gray. And then we can no longer see it in our viewport while we're in edit mode. And if we want to see the final mesh, we can tab out back into object mode. So we can tab back and forth to see our cage mesh and to see our final subdivided mesh. Why are we doing this? This is going to allow us to be able to see it a little bit easier. After you get used to sub-D modeling, you can go ahead and turn that back on and play around with that. Now we have one more problem that we're seeing here, and that is the surface of it feels rough. It doesn't really feel smooth yet. So in step number 3, we're going to fix that with our shade smooth setting. So to do that, we need to be in object mode. This does not work in edit mode. So once you're in object mode, we'll right click on the object and then we'll go to shade smooth, which is all the way at the top. Shade smooth, and then we'll see all of a sudden we got a very smooth surface going. Now, obviously this isn't looking good at this point. This isn't what we want. It's a little too round at this point. So we'll go ahead and start fixing that in the next chapter. Our goal now is to fix the cage mesh so that our subdivision modifier can function correctly. For step number 1, we need to delete the entire back faces. While I'm in object mode, I'm going to select my blade. I'm going to hit tab to jump into edit mode. I'm going to hit 3 to jump into face selection mode. And now we need to select the back faces. I'll jump into my select tool. I'll select one of the back faces and then I will shift click the remaining of the back faces. Great. And then once we have all them selected, we can then perform our delete. So I'll hit X on my keyboard to jump into the delete menu. Then we'll choose delete faces. Then once we have that, you'll notice that if you jump back out into object mode, you'll notice that the back edge is now fixed. We have our cage mesh fixed for that area, but the rest of it is still too
Това е кухо вътре.
too smooth. So how do we fix that? For step number 2, we need to add some resolution to our mesh. I'll jump back into edit mode by hitting tab, And currently we are too low poly. This isn't enough polygons for our subdivision modifier to work correctly. I'll go to my select menu. I'll do select all, the very top option. And then after we have the entire mesh selected, I'm going to right click and then choose subdivide, the very top option, just like we did it when we blocked in the blade. Once you have that, if you start to tab in and out of object mode and edit mode, you'll start to see the mesh is now holding its shape a lot more. This is what we're after, but it's still not enough. It still feels too round. So how do we solve this? There are a few different ways we're going to get into in this course to be able to do this, such as edge creases, and there's also holding edges, which is adding more loop cuts, but we're going to keep things super basic for this example. For step number 3, we have a basic solution for this problem, which is our simple smoothing in our subdivision modifier. I'll go back to my subdivision modifier, then I'll change the option from Catmull Clark over to simple. So what is all this doing? Very similar to when we right click and subdivided our mesh in edit mode, this simply adds more resolution to our mesh without adding a smoothing operation. Now the question you might be asking is, why wouldn't we just do another subdivision in our edit mode? This is because our subdivision modifier is non-destructive, which means we can always just adjust this later on as we continue and extend our mesh out to be its full length. And so step number 4, we need to add a new subdivision modifier to get our smoothing back. I'm going to go to my add modifier, go to the second column, and then the 5th one to the bottom, we're going to choose subdivision surface modifier again. I'm going to add that. And then for my values I'm going to sit here, I'm going to disable visibility in edit mode. Then I'm going to turn the levels in both the viewport and rendered mode to 1 and 1. And then I'm going to leave the Catmull Clark setting on, which of course is just a fancy word for smoothing the object. Now if I tab back out into object mode, we should now see that our blade is starting to feel a lot more hard surface. This is starting to feel like what we want. Okay, so that's a wrap for this chapter, but a few bonus tips here. We can control how sharp this is by controlling the first subdivision modifier. I'm going to leave off with a value of 2, but if I lower this to a value of 1, you'll notice that the tip becomes rounder. And if I raise this up to 3, it gets sharper. It's because we have more resolution for our subdivision modifier to work. Now for rendering purposes, I'm going to leave off with a value of 2. This is so that later on in the course, the light will catch the edge a little bit better. And although that's not as realistic, it's going to feel a lot more realistic in the end. And we'll continue in the next chapter.
Интересно. Въпреки, че най-вероятно ще трябва да гледам на ново цялото нещо. Но дълбоко влязъл в този моряз. Що спретявам толкова много? Пум, 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 пум.
The goal now is to extend the blade to its full length. For step number 1, we need to make our selection, which is the back edges of our blade. In object mode, I'll select my blade. I'll hit tab to jump into edit mode again. Then I'll hit 2 on my keyboard to jump into edge selection mode. First, I'm going to show you what not to do, so bring your eyes back to the video for this one. In Blender, if you try to perform a selection from the wrong angle, you might accidentally miss a selection. Blender's 3D viewport by default only selects what is visible. It doesn't select through an object. Okay, now it's your turn. So rotate your 3D view around to get into position, and then box drag select the entire back edge of the blade, and then rotate around and just make sure you have everything selected. And then for step number 2, we need to do our extrusion. I'm going to select my extrusion tool. Now we have another Blender gotcha here, so bring your eyes back again to the video. If I quickly make an extrusion, you'll notice that I get this magic little pop-up back into our extrusion blade, and then rotate around and just make sure you have everything selected. And then for step number 2, we need to do our extrusion. I'm going to select my extrusion tool. Now we have another Blender gotcha here, so bring your eyes back again to the video. If I quickly make an extrusion, you'll notice that I get this magic little pop-up panel at the bottom left of my 3D view. This is our last action operator panel. This is historically problematic because if you click anywhere or activate any tool immediately after doing this, the menu disappears, it goes away, and it's hard to get back. The last action operator panel is only displayed in your last action. And if you click anything or activate another tool, that is technically another action in Blender. So I'll undo my extrusion, and now it's your turn. I'll click and drag to perform the extrusion. Now before clicking anywhere, you want to go down and find your last action operator panel. Then click to expand it. And if you accidentally don't get this, just go ahead and undo out of that extrusion and do it again. And here we can perform some additional settings to the last action that we just did. In this case, I'll set the move to 4.8 in the Z axis, then the default value of 0 in both X and Y. Now, where did I get the value of 4.8? Those again are all from when I prepped the lecture. This will make a little bit more sense in a couple chapters. Then there we go. We should now see that we have the full length of the blade. And if I tab back out in object mode, the subdivision settings that are all non-destructive are automatically applied to that new part of the mesh. And we're all set, and we'll continue in the next chapter. The goal now is to add a slight taper effect to the blade. So it's going to be wider at the base and then slimmer at the tip. For step number 1, we need to add a simple deformer modifier. While I'm still in object mode, I'm going to go to my modifiers panel, select add modifier, and then in the third column, about halfway down, we have the simple deformer modifier. And then after that, you should start to see something starting to happen to the mesh. So what's going on? In step number 2, we need to apply our settings. First, I'm going to collapse the first 2 subdivision modifiers to make a bit more space to work. Then we have our third simple deformer modifier that's going to be expanded. First, I'm going to disable visibility in edit mode on the simple deformer modifier so that we can easily see the cage mesh if we go back to edit mode. Then I'm going to select the taper operation, and then I'm going to select the y-axis. We need the y-axis because if we see the top left of the 3D view, this is the direction that the blade is going. So that's the direction that we want our deformer to go. Now to test this out, if we click and drag on the factor setting, going left and right, we can start to see that the taper effect has started to be expanded and contracted depending on the values that we set here. I'm going to manually set this to a value of 0.35 in the factor. And that's just going to give a very, very, very slight tapering effect. And a special updated note from our frequently asked questions. If your taper effect is getting smaller at the base, this happens because technically your blade is rotated in a different direction as mine. So if you're having this issue, rotate the blade 180 degrees, then hit apply rotation. This should fix the taper direction issue. But special note here, you only want to do this if the taper direction is going the wrong way. Now back to the video. Now technically this is making our blade bigger overall, which is not what we want. We wanted the tip to taper in, not the base to be expanded out. So we can compensate for this with the scaling operation. And so step number 3, we need to adjust the scale of our object. I'm going to go back to my object properties panel, making sure my blade is still selected. Then in scale X, I'm going to scale this down to a value of 0.18. And by scaling this down, overall, the blade is still going to be the same width. It's just getting a little bit smaller towards the tip. And that was tapering the blade, and we'll continue in the next chapter.
We'll walk.
Our goal right now is to block in the rest of the mesh objects using the primitive shapes. And then in the future chapters, we'll begin modeling and shaping them out. For step number 1, I'm going to create our cylinder primitive shape. First, we'll go to our object mode, and then we'll go over to our add menu, and then we'll find the sub menu, which is mesh. A quick tip here, the add menu is technically available in both object and edit mode, but since we're creating an entirely new object, we want to make sure that we're in object mode and not edit mode before creating these new objects. In our mesh submenu, we'll find a lot of different primitive shapes that we can start to work with. These are generally speaking how we're going to start our modeling process with one of these primitive shapes. Then we'll go down to cylinder. This is what we'll be using for the remaining shapes. For step number 2, immediately after clicking the cylinder, before doing anything else, we want to go to our last action operator panel. This is going to be labeled add cylinder. If you do not see this panel, it's most likely because you performed some action, you click something, and it disappeared. This is a very common thing to happen. So if you need to get this back, you can always use the hotkey F9, or you can just delete the cylinder and create it again. Just know that you don't want to click anything if you want to access this menu after you perform an action. We can expand the operator panel by clicking on it, and there we'll see all the default values that create our cylinder. We want to change the vertices to a value of 10. So why are we changing this to a value of 10? This is going to make our cylinder a bit more low polygon. Generally speaking, while we're modeling, we want to start low poly and then add details onto it, which then will become our higher resolution polygon mesh. And then our final step in here, we want to change the cap fill type to none. This will give us an empty space at the top of our cylinder, which we're not going to use later on down the road. So we'll go ahead and get rid of that now. Now we need to move the cylinder into position for the guard. I'll go back over to my object properties, and then under location Y values, we're going to use the value of 5.82, and then we're going to rotate it 90 degrees in the X value. And a special note here, if your blade is not going in the right direction, the solution for that is to rotate the sword 180 degrees in the Z axis. And then I'll set the scale X to 0.275, the scale Y to 0.13, and then scale Z to 0.1. So where am I
Mm,
and all these values? Again, this is all from when I prepped the lecture. Usually I would just eye this up in the viewport, but to help us stay on the same page, let's manually set these numbers so that all the parameters and everything will sync up down the road. Now, before we move on, this is a very good time for us to frame selected since we have our guard in place. So that'll bring us super close and be ready to work. And then this object will eventually become our guard. And then for step number 3, we're going to duplicate the cylinder a couple different times and then set the value for the handle, the pommel base, and the pommel tip. I'm going to right click duplicate objects, hit escape to drop it, and then while my duplicate is still selected, I can easily set my values then. I'll set my location Y value to 6.54, and then my scale values to 0.12, 0.12, and 0.62. And then we just repeat this process over and over. So bonus tip here, if you want to be able to jump through these settings quickly, while you have your parameter selected, you can easily jump to the next parameter by hitting your tab key on your hotkey. And if I'm moving too fast for you here, I'll have all the scale values on my screen at the end of the chapter for you to easily check them.
oh, tak, мисля, че днес ще бъде толкова. Утре може би малко повече. Може би по-късно пак. За сега няма представа. Просто искам малко нещо друго да правя и ще видим. Чао, чао и